more time, can we thank our musicians for their amazing music this morning? So one of the things that I love about doing a joint service every once in a while is how many of you have gotten to see somebody this morning that maybe you haven't gotten to see in a while because you worship at the other service, whatever other service they don't go to. Anybody have that experience? It's good to see folks, isn't it? Isn't that fun? That's an amazing thing about being together. Hey, after the service, meet some more new friends, maybe greet some old ones. Stick around because we have some patriotic treats in the lobby after the service. Here's what we have. We have some America Little Debbie snack cakes because there's nothing more American than preservatives, right? Okay, so stick around for those. And then if that isn't enough sugar for you, we also have some Bomb Pox because let's face it, it's hot out there, it's July, and you could use a little frozen treat too. And so whether it's a Bomb Pop or a Little Debbie snack cake, stick around for a few minutes after the service, greet some folks, say hi to them, and just enjoy this amazing holiday weekend. And I'm really glad that you carved some time out of your holiday weekend to be here with us and worship this morning. So I want to begin this morning's message with a question. Here's the question. Is there somebody in your life who, when you talk to them or encounter them, they have this funny way, almost this, inevitable way of igniting a little spark of jealousy in you? Do you have anybody like that? Maybe for you, it's your coworker, and you know which coworker I'm talking about, right? Because you're the one who does all of the work at work, but they are the one who takes all of the credits. And whenever they do, that ignites just a little spark of jealousy in you. Or maybe it's that one family that you see all the time on social media, on Facebook, on Instagram, on TikTok, whatever, right? Because they're always posting about their amazing family. They're always posting pictures of their incredible vacations you will never, ever, ever be able to afford and able to take. And whenever they do, it ignites just a little spark of jealousy in you. Or maybe for you, it's not just that you're jealous of someone, you're jealous for someone. Because that same person that you follow on social media who's always posting all those pictures of their amazing vacations, they're also posting all of those pictures of all of their amazing things that their kids do. You know, how they get the starting spot on the football team or the award that they win, the honor society that they are in, the solo that they get to perform at the school concert. And your kids, they don't do any of that stuff. And whenever you see those pictures of those kids, it ignites a little spark of jealousy in you. Do you have anybody in your life who, whenever you see them, talk to them, encounter them, or around them, they have this funny way of just igniting a little spark of jealousy in you? What do you do with that jealousy? Let's start with a little bit of Shakespeare this morning, okay? This is from Othello. Oh, beware, my lord, of jealousy. And then this super famous metaphor for jealousy. Jealousy is the green-eyed monster. You ever become a little green with envy? You ever turn a little green with jealousy? So this summer at Zion, we're walking through and working through a book of the Old Testament, actually the fourth book of the Old Testament, the book of Numbers. And Numbers actually takes place at a very critical juncture in the history of the Old Testament nation of Israel. Because 2 books before in the Bible, the book of Exodus, God comes to a man named Moses. And God says to Moses, I have a commission for you. I have a mission for you. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to go and get the people of Israel, because they are in a centuries-long slavery to the empire of Egypt. Now, there are 2 million of them, but here's what I want you to do. I want you to rescue them from their slavery in Egypt, and I want you to take them to a new land, a better land, a land in the Bible that is called the Promised Land. Today, we call it the nation of Israel. But, Moses, in order to get from point A to point B, you and 2 million of your closest friends are going to have to go on a little journey. You're going to have to travel through a desert region called the Sinai Peninsula. You're going to have to wander through the wilderness, but trust me, I will be with you. And the book of Numbers really is the story of that journey from the empire of Egypt to the Promised Land. And today, as we continue on our journey through the book of Numbers, we come to a place on the Sinai Peninsula called Hazeroth. And it's not far outside the Promised Land. They're real close to the Promised Land. And it's right here at Hazeroth that a little bit of jealousy bubbles up in the people of Israel. Because Moses, it turns out, has a couple of siblings. He has a sister named Miriam, and he has a brother named Aaron. And Miriam and Aaron, they engage in a little bit of sibling rivalry with Moses. But the sibling rivalry is sparked by some deep-seated jealousy. Here's the story, Numbers 12, beginning at verse 1. Miriam and Aaron, they begin to talk bad about, they really begin to gossip about Moses, because he had married a Cushite wife. So, as our story opens for today, we have Miriam and Aaron, Moses' brother and sister. They begin to talk bad about their sister-in-law, Moses' wife, because of her ethnicity. She's from a region called Cush. Now, Cush, just to kind of orient you here, was the southern parts of the empire of Egypt. And so here's probably what happened, okay? When Moses and Miriam and Aaron and all 2 million of the Israelites, when they were all stuck in slavery in the Egyptian empire, Moses probably met this really pretty Egyptian girl from South Egypt. The two of them fell in love. The two of them got married, and she was brought with Moses into the wilderness to the promised land. But Miriam and Aaron don't like this, and here's why they don't like it. They're thinking to themselves, you know what? Didn't we leave Egypt behind? Why are you bringing someone from Egypt with you, even if she is your wife, Moses? That's their presenting complaints. But here's the funny thing about their presenting complaints. Their presenting complaint isn't actually their real problem. Something else is going on here that has nothing to do with Moses' wife and everything to do with jealousy. And here's how I know that. Miriam and Aaron follow up their complaints with a question. Numbers 12, verse 2. Has the Lord spoken only through Moses? They ask. Miriam and Aaron have been watching Moses do some amazing things. They've been watching Moses be used by God in some amazing ways. After all, at this time in Israel's history, he is the leader of the whole nation. He was the one who got to go to the king of Egypt, the Pharaoh, and say to the Pharaoh, hey, let God's people go. He was the one who got to lead 2 million people out of the empire of Egypt to the banks of a place called the Red Sea. And if you know the story, Moses was the one who got to part the waters of the Red Sea so that all 2 million of the Israelites could pass through safely. Moses was the one who got to speak to God intimately. He was the one who got to take a hiking trip up a mountain and receive from God the most famous piece of legislation of all times in the form of the Ten Commandments. Moses was the one who got to do all sorts of amazing things. And quite frankly, Miriam and Aaron want to know, why don't we get to do those things too? They're jealous of Moses and what he gets to do. Now, back to Numbers 12, verse 2, the Lord hears this. The Lord sees Miriam and Aaron's jealousy. In verse 4 of Exodus 12, the Lord actually says to Moses, Aaron, and Miriam, I want you to come out to the tent of meeting. And the tent of meeting, just so you know, this is basically God's tent. Because all of Israel's in the wilderness, everybody's camping out, everybody has their own tents, even God has his own tent. It's called the tent of meeting. And so God says to Moses, Aaron, and Miriam, I want you to come to my tent, all 3 of you. And so that's what the 3 of them do. They go out, and the Lord comes down like in a pillar of cloud. He literally descends on his tent in the clouds, and he stands at the entrance to his tent. And then he summons 2 out of the 3. He says, Aaron and Miriam, come a little closer to me. And so when the 2 of them step forward, he says, now I want you to listen to me. Whenever there's a prophet among you, and by the way, a prophet is just someone who is called by God to speak for God. And so whenever there's someone who's called by God to speak for God among you, I, the Lord, I will come to them and I will reveal myself to them in visions and I will speak to them in dreams. In other words, I will encounter them in kind of a mysterious and mystical way. But I encounter Moses in a very different way. With him, I never give him a dream. I don't just give him a vision. I just sit down and talk with him, face to face. There's nothing mysterious or mystical about the way that I encounter him. He actually gets to see me. You get to see me hidden in a pillar of cloud. Moses, God says, just gets to see me. And so why then, if I would talk to Moses that way, if I like Moses that much, why would you not be afraid to speak against my servant Moses? In fact, God begins to get angry at Miriam and Aaron's jealousy. And so he leaves them. He literally takes his cloud and leaves his tent. And when the cloud lifts from above the tent, something terrible and tragic has happened to Moses' sister Miriam. Her skin is leprous. Now, a little bit of medical history here for you. In the ancient world, leprosy was one of the world's most dreaded diseases. It was dreaded not just because of what it did to your skin. It disfigured your skin. It was also dreaded because of what it did to your nerve endings. It would literally make you unable to feel. It would destroy your nerve endings. And this was very dangerous, especially in the ancient world, because you would be outside a lot, and you would get cuts and scrapes and bruises and even puncture wounds. And if you got a cut or a scrape or a bruise or a puncture wound, if you had leprosy, you wouldn't be able to feel that wound, which means you wouldn't take care of that wound immediately, and then that wound would get infected, and then you would turn septic and you would eventually die. Leprosy in the ancient world was basically an inevitable death sentence. And Miriam now has this disease. Miriam now has leprosy. You know why? Because she fell prey to jealousy. Now, Miriam's physical condition tells us something deeply spiritual about the danger of jealousy. And here's what it tells us. Spiritually, jealousy really is deadly. Proverbs 14, verse 30, jealousy, you know what it does? It rots the bones. It eats away at you from the inside out. And so I should probably ask you again, is there anybody in your life who, whenever you see them or encounter them or talk to them, they ignite just a little spark of jealousy in you? Because if they do, that's dangerous to your soul. In fact, since it's the 250th birthday of America, let's do a little American history this morning, okay? I'm going to throw up a couple of pictures for you. You guys may know who these guys are. You might not. Okay, let's start with the guy on the left. Anybody know who this guy is? John Adams. The guy on the right, very famous, Thomas Jefferson. So these two guys, okay, they were actually friends. In fact, they were guys who fought side by side in the Revolutionary War. They were on the same side of that revolution. They actually got to know each other because they both shared a love of books. They were both very well read and very highly educated, and so they would do kind of the book club thing where they would swap books back and forth. In fact, they were such good friends that when it came time to write the Declaration of Independence, John Adams was the one who promoted Thomas Jefferson to be the drafter of the Declaration of Independence. He's the reason that Thomas Jefferson got to write the thing because John Adams believed in his friend so much and so deeply, and he loved him that dearly. The two of them were great friends until they both got into politics. Because you know how this works, right? Politics has a funny way of ruining friendships. So, the year was 1796, and America was working on electing the first president after the first president. So George Washington had served his 2 terms, and now it was time for America to elect a new president. And the two of them both wanted to be president, and so they ran against each other. And that was the end of their friendship. In fact, here's the 1796 Electoral College map, okay? John Adams won, but notice he didn't win by a lot. And when Thomas Jefferson lost, he was devastated. And he was jealous because he wanted the job that John Adams had gotten. Now, some of you may know this just historically, okay? Way back in the founding era, whoever won the presidency. Whoever lost got the, anybody know? Vice presidency. We've since changed that because of, elections like Thomas Jefferson and John Adams. John Adams basically spent 4 years being reminded every single day of the presidential office that just slipped right away through his hands. And the jealousy inside of him just grew. The resentment toward John Adams grew. And so you know what Thomas Jefferson decided to do? Try again. In the year 1800. And when he did, he pulled out everything and the kitchen sink against his old friend, John Adams. He published pamphlets, he published books, he published flyers talking about how awful John Adams was, talking about how much damage he had done to the country, how much damage he would do to the country, and you know what? It worked. Because here's the electoral map from 1800, and it was close, but Thomas Jefferson eked it out. And now it was John Adams' turn to be devastated. Now it was John Adams' turn to be filled with rage and resentment and jealousy, especially because John Adams won the presidency for only one term. You know how many terms Thomas Jefferson won the presidency for? 2. He ultimately became more politically successful, and because he did, these two guys just hated each other. Near the end of Thomas Jefferson's first term, Thomas Jefferson got a letter from a gal named Abigail Adams, who's the wife of John Adams. And when a guy's wife writes you a letter, that means you done something wrong, right? And this is what Abigail Adams had to say to Thomas Jefferson. She said, it's like your relationship is trapped in a Gordian knot, right? It's a knot so tight that nobody can untie it. And you've tried to untie it, right? You've tried to untie it by all the efforts of party spirit. You're both part of different political parties, and you figure if you can just, fight to the death, one of you will untie it and win. You've tried to untie it by rivalship, running against each other again and again. But really what's going on here is just good old-fashioned jealousy. Each of you wants the office that the other one has. And let me tell you something about jealousy, Abigail Adams says. It's a malignant fiend. Here's what it's like. It's like a serpent. It's like a serpent that you cherish and you warm. You feed it. You take care of it. But you know what serpents do, right? They bite the hands that feed them. And the serpent jealousy has bitten you. And when a serpent bites you, that's poison. That's deadly. Jealousy is deadly. In fact, here's how deadly jealousy really is. The morning before Jesus is crucified, he has to stand trial before a governor. Very famous governor. His name is Pontius Pilate. And he's drugged there by some Jewish religious leaders who hate Jesus. And so when they drag him before this trial, they start, throwing everything in the kitchen sink at Jesus, okay? They come up with every charge they can make up. But when Pilate starts listening to all the charges against Jesus, he begins to become a little suspicious of the charges against Jesus because he begins to realize that maybe Jesus isn't as guilty as they're making him out to be. He can see right through the religious leaders and what they're trying to do. Now Pontius Pilate knows that if he lets Jesus go, he's going to have a revolution on his hands. And so Pontius Pilate doesn't want to do that. So he decides that he's going to try to weasel out of it using an old tradition. In Matthew 27, verse 15, there's this custom that he has to release a prisoner when a large crowd gathers for a trial. And a large crowd had gathered for the trial of Jesus. And so Pilate at this time just happened to have two well-known prisoners in his custody, okay? One, his name was Jesus. The other well-known prisoner was Barabbas. Now, everybody knew about Barabbas because Barabbas was not only famous, he was infamous. He had participated in an insurrection. He had committed murder several times. He had been a party to several robberies. Barabbas was a bad dude. And so Pontius Pilate is thinking to himself, Barabbas, he's a danger to society. Jesus, he's just a guy that some Jewish religious leaders do not like. And so, when the crowd begins to gather for this trial, Pontius Pilate finally says to them, which one of these two do you want me to release to you? Do you want Barabbas or do you want Jesus? Now, the gospel writer Matthew, as he's telling this story, adds this little interesting note about what was going on in the religious leaders' hearts. Matthew says that Pilate knew that it was out of what? Jealousy. That they had handed Jesus over to him. The religious leaders, they were jealous of Jesus. They were jealous that Jesus was a better teacher than they could ever hope to be. They were jealous that Jesus was able to do miracles that they could never hope to do. They were jealous that Jesus was more popular with the people than they ever were or ever would be. It was jealousy that killed Jesus. Do you have anybody in your life who, whenever you see them or talk to them or are around them, they just have this funny way of igniting a little bit of jealousy in you? I'm going to push for a second. In fact, I'm going to do more than push. I'm going to shove. That little spark of jealousy, that's what killed the Son of God. Do you really want that living inside of you? So Thomas Jefferson and John Adams had this friend. His name was Benjamin Rush. He was a doctor. He was also a founding father. And Benjamin Rush had heard about what had happened to John Adams and Thomas Jefferson and their friendship, and he wanted to do something about it, right? He wanted to try to reconcile the two of them and bring the two of them back together. And so he started talking to both of them, and neither one of them would budge. Took him over a year, but finally, John Adams was the one who broke first. Because Benjamin Rush was nagging and nagging and nagging him, John Adams finally said, fine, I'll write Thomas Jefferson a letter. And he did. On January 1st, 1812. In fact, you can go to the National Archives and see the letter. Here's a copy of the letter. And the letter has a bunch of basic pleasantries in it, right? You know, he talks about what's going on in his family, and he wishes Thomas Jefferson a happy new year, all that kind of stuff. But then I want you to notice the little highlighted section at the end. It's just 2 words, where John Adams says to Thomas Jefferson, I'm your friend. Because once upon a time they were. And John Adams was kind of hoping that one day again they would be. But first, you know what they both had to do? They both had to kill their jealousy. You know, it took Thomas Jefferson a few weeks to write back, but eventually he did. And when he did, the relationship began to fall back together. In fact, over the next decade and a half before both of them died, by the way, both on the same day, they both passed away on the same day, they wrote each other 380 letters. They talked about everything from religion to politics. They told old war stories from the Revolutionary War. My favorite letter, though, comes from Thomas Jefferson. This one he sent on August 15th, 1820. He said to John Adams after they had kind of fixed everything, I'm sure that I really know many, many things. Thomas Jefferson never had a problem with humility, okay? I know a lot of things. I've read a lot of books. I've been a lot of places. But then he adds this, but I know nothing more surely that I love you with all my heart. Thomas Jefferson and John Adams had a choice. They could either let jealousy kill them in their relationship and their friendship, or they could kill jealousy. They decided that they were going to kill jealousy. How about you? Which one are you going to choose? You know, if you're here this morning and you do struggle, right? Looking at somebody else's Instagram account or wondering why in the world that one person gets all the lucky breaks and you don't get any lucky breaks. If you do struggle with jealousy of somebody else, let me just give you a strategy, just one simple thing that you can begin to do today, right now, this afternoon, whenever you want to start, to begin to dismantle and disarm jealousy in your life. Here's what you can do. You can pray for the person you're jealous of. You can pray for the person you're jealous of. You know, part of the reason that I like this strategy so much is that after Miriam and Aaron start talking bad about their sister-in-law and Moses' wife, and after Moses finds out about this, okay, they've been talking bad against his wife. And after he finds out that Miriam and Aaron have been complaining about all the fun stuff that he gets to do that they don't get to, and after Miriam winds up with leprosy, you know what Moses does? I can tell you what I'd be tempted to do. I'd be tempted to fall prey to a little bit of schadenfreude, right? Which is, you know, my pleasure at somebody else's pain. Serves them right. That's what you get, right? For falling prey to jealousy. But that's not what Moses does. Numbers 12, verse 13, he cries out to the Lord, please, God, heal her. And God does. You know, part of the reason praying for somebody you're jealous of is so powerful is because jealousy and prayer can't coexist for long. One of those two things is going to have to win. You're either going to keep being jealous and stop praying, or you're going to keep on praying and stop being jealous. But if you pray for that person you're jealous of, if you pray that God would continue to bless them, in fact, bless them even more and give to them even more and love them even more, what you will begin to realize is that you love them too. Just like God loves them. You only have two choices. Jealousy can kill you. It can break your relationships. It can steal your joy. Or you can kill jealousy. Choose wisely. In fact, I was thinking about this. At the heart of jealousy, okay, is really this strange sense of an equity. Because here's what happens when we get jealous of somebody else, okay? We look at what somebody else has, and we may be jealous of them, but secretly we're really angry at God, right? Because here's what we're really thinking. Why did God give to them what he didn't give to me? That's not fair. That's not part of equity. Why did God give them all that money? Why did God give them that great family? Why did God give them that great job? Why did he give to them what he didn't give to me? Here's what jealousy always says. Jealousy says, I deserve, I have it coming to me, the good things that somebody else has. That's what jealousy says. Here's the problem with that. Here's the problem with that. Here's the lie in that. It's really hard to discover God's purpose for your life when you're too busy looking at God's purpose in somebody else's life. In fact, this was exactly the problem that Aaron and Miriam had. You know what Aaron was? You know what he got to do? He was the high priest of Israel. He got to be the spiritual leader for 2 million Israelites. You know what Miriam was? You know what she got to do? She was a worship leader in Israel. Pastor Kyle, he gets to lead worship for, a few hundred people. Miriam, she was the worship leader for 2 million people. They were insanely, incredibly blessed. But they couldn't see it because they were too busy looking at Moses' blessings instead of their own. That's what jealousy always does. It says, I deserve the good things that somebody else has, which is why the cross is so needed. It's why Jesus is so needed. Because what Jesus does when he dies on the cross is he takes jealousy and he turns it on its head. Jealousy says, I deserve the good things that they have. Jesus, when he dies on the cross, he says, I'll take the worst things that you have. I'll take your sin and your shame and your pain, and I'm going to take it all with me. All that's going to be gone. And by the way, I'll even take your jealousy. Here's the amazing thing about the cross, okay? Jealousy is what killed Jesus on the cross. The religious leaders were jealous of Jesus, so they got him killed. They got him crucified. But on the cross, Jesus killed jealousy. And Jesus can take your jealousy too. In fact, I'll wrap up with this, okay? A quote. This is from an ancient church father. His name is Augustine. He was a bishop in Africa in the 4th century. And Augustine has one of the most insightful things about jealousy that I have ever heard. He says this, jealousy always contends for excellence. In other words, it looks at what somebody else has and says, I want that. I deserve the good thing that somebody else has. But then Augustine plays a little trick. He says, so you want good things, huh? You want excellent things? You want the best things? Well, turn to God and ask this question. God, what's so excellent as you? What's the answer to that question? Nothing. No one. And God has given himself to you in his son Jesus. Because of Jesus, you already have the best thing. You already have the most excellent thing. So, what do you really have to be jealous of? You only got 2 choices. You can kill jealousy, or jealousy can kill you. Jesus took your jealousy with him on a cross. And now all you're left with is the best thing. Him. No one better than that. Let's stand and pray. Heavenly Father, it's so tempting to look at somebody else's blessings and count theirs. Can we count our own? And may we always be grateful for the blessing that is most excellent of all, your Son, Jesus Christ. It's in his name that we pray. Amen.